The final report is out on the Caravan accident where an unfortunate woman who was piloting it hit a smokestack. My original take on this particular accident focused on the continuing descent below MDA on the final segment. Stick with me on FlyWire. We'll talk about it. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire, we're going to review the final report in the docket on this particular accident, the 208B 928 Juliet Papa. My original focus on this accident was the descent past the MDA. I try not to go too far out on a limb by speculating in the early days of an accident, and it's always interesting to see what the final report comes up with. I like to update when it is and talk about if I made it wrong, or if I made a wrong call, I'll talk about it. And we'll talk about what the NTSB found. I'll leave a link below to that original video there. Full disclosure, I did review another accident and one real world experience in that particular video, so you'll have to wade through some other stuff there. Sorry about that. In this instance, the final report was very close to what I focused on for this particular accident, but there were some new facts that fleshed out the reality of the experience that this pilot had. I think we can all learn something important and some important lessons here, and it never hurts to foot stomp those. The pilot was operating the Caravan as a Part 135 charter on an IFR cargo flight from Salt Lake City to Hayburn, Idaho. The date was April 13th, 2022, and the time was at 8:32 in the morning. The forecast and observation had large areas of falling snow, low visibility, and icing conditions in K Bravo Yankee India. It was smack in the middle of it. That's the airport identifier. The pilot checked the weather at 5 in the morning, this is from the docket, and filed a flight plan for 7 a.m. and she took off exactly at 7 a.m. Climbed to 12,000 feet for the uneventful flight to BYI. Approaching Burley Municipal, the controller cleared the pilot for an RNAV 20 approach using MUTO as the IF. You can see it's kind of a 90 entry there. The weather was observed and recorded by the ASOS for that first approach as winds 190 at 8, visibility 1 mile, light snow and mist, broken ceiling at 2,300 foot AGL, and overcast at 2,800 feet. Temperature was -3 C and dew point was -5 C, altimeter 2996. The second approach, winds 210 at 8, visibility 2.5 miles, ceiling broken 3,000 AGL, overcast 4,700 feet, temperature -3, dew point -6 C, and the altimeter 2997, slightly improvement in conditions. Apparently, she had no intention of landing on that first approach. She missed approach and then flew down the runway about 20 feet off the ground. Perhaps this was to check out the landing surface conditions. As you can see in this video that was taken by a hangar security camera, the runway had snow on it, and I could not find any reports of runway conditions, contamination, precip, etc. May have just missed it, but I don't think so. It's not a towered airport. But I seriously doubt anybody was there monitoring it, so much less reporting it. This is not a big airport, frankly. As I said, not towered. The company pilot notes actually recommend doing a check similar to this prior to landing at uncontrolled fields. And so I think by procedure, she was checking it out. See, well, am I going to be able to stop the airplane if I get it on the ground? She requested the same approach with the controller and was told to report established in the hold at Arimi. Reporting established in the hold, she was then cleared the approach. The glide path for this LNAV approach is 3.75 degrees, slightly steeper than normal, a normal 3 degrees at least. It also appears that her habit pattern was to intercept the glide slope from above and then follow it after the IF, so prior to the FAF. She did the same thing on both approaches, same technique, so into the glide slope this way. Before I go on, I would like to comment on that technique. Realize that a technique is not mandatory. A procedure is written, but a technique is just a way to accomplish a task. The way I do it for this task is to descend to the FAF altitude from that intermediate point, descend to the FAF altitude, and intercept the glide path from below. This gives the box plenty of time to vary all its parameters, give me valid indications that it's going to give me good guidance during the approach, and I can observe that. Plus, it gives me time to prepare the intercept and then follow the glide path. And generally, I put the gear down at the final approach fix and approach flaps. Besides those reasons, intercepting the glide path from above tends to confuse the box. My experience, it confuses the box a little bit and the pilot, with the result of the airplane porpoising through the glide path for a bit before settling down. And what I mean is you're not going to get it just right. It's easier to hit the FAF with hit the glide path, put your gear down, and then just you're right on the descent. Okay, so that technique usually finds pilots mismanaging power and descent speeds, and end result is large speed deviances. Those descent rates that suffer, I think it's a bit of a problem. It's kind of erratic, it's my view. This is exactly what happened to the pilot during both these approaches. It took a while to work through it. And what I see is the primary reason that I don't like it is the workload is very high. So I try to avoid high workload. I like every instrument to be boring and as methodical as I can. The net result of intercepting a glide path from above is that higher workload, and that's why I try to avoid it. That's my nickel there. A witness reported seeing the Caravan break out and power up on the accident flight. Snow was falling, and there was a cloud of, this is the accident flight now, cloud of steam from the dryer stacks that blew across the flight path. Security video showed the airplane nose high, flaps up in an apparent attempt to climb above the smokestack. The airplane's right wing impacted the smokestack and was sheared off. The aircraft came to rest on the roof of the building. For both approaches, the flaps were up, okay, and the speeds were also well below the minimum approach speed for an inadvertent encounter with icing conditions. To my knowledge here, this Caravan did not have flight into known icing conditions. The procedure for icing conditions was to be flaps up until landing is assured and use no more than 20 degrees flaps and at 105 knots. There was visible moisture. A witness had reported heavy snow during the time period, and investigators found that ice was on the radome of the right wing, but nowhere else on the aircraft. There was a TKS tank found breached with no fluid in it, and no observation of TKS fluid was found around the aircraft. But frankly, that does not mean that it wasn't used or that it was used. It was on board, and we don't know if it was used or not. To be fair, the weather was reporting moderate or greater icing between 5,700 feet AGL and 9,500 feet AGL. So there was icing, it was icing conditions. Maybe not right there on that approach. A little history about this potato factory, the one with the smokestack, dating about 6 years prior to the accident. It had been rebuilt and apparently extended, and this resulted in 2 separate investigations by the FAA, primarily because they didn't ask for permission. They just did it, and the airport manager apparently called them on it and had the FAA look at it. The top of the stack was within the lateral boundaries of the approach, and the top was 100 feet above the ground, making the top 98 feet below the bottom of the glide path. That's not a whole lot of clearance for that. Among the recommendations of the FAA studies, both of them, the net result was to lower the stack, or barring that, to paint it orange and white with lighting at the top. Additionally, the FAA decided to deactivate the vertical approach slope indicator, the VASI, lights for runway 20, which is unfortunate because it's a difficult runway to get into. It's short and the only approach they have. A light had been installed and the VASI had been deactivated, but the high-vis paint had not been applied. It appears that the stack extension had proceeded without that company, as I said before, without the company contacting the FAA. So they were in negotiations, if you will, on that situation. There is an interesting story about that I'll tell about at the end of the video about that light, so stay tuned. The aircraft impacted the smokestack about 14 feet below the top, or about 86 feet above the ground. As part of the investigation, an examination of the flight path was done. I think NTSB did a really good job, I think. And that investigation into the flight path was corrected to date and time and weather conditions. 3 different eye heights were examined. The eye height is where you sit in the pilot's seat, see the dash, what can you see? And the simulation found that for an average eye height position, the runway was in sight, but the smokestack was obscured by the dash from 29.5 to 3.3 seconds prior to impact. That is significant. Didn't even see it. This would correlate to what the witnesses reported the aircraft appearing below the clouds, the power coming up, and the nose-high attitude observed. A bit of a shock, apparently. The top of the stack was 4,256 feet MSL, and the point of impact was 4,240 feet MSL. Remember, the glide path is 98 feet, the bottom of the glide path is 98 feet above that stack. The MDA, however, was 4,560 feet MSL, which translates to 500 feet AGL in that for the MDA. In other words, the airplane was 320 feet below the MDA at impact. I think that's significant. The displaced threshold was 305 feet from the pavement edge. This is on the runway now. And the threshold crossing height there was 40 feet. The impact occurred 2,632 feet prior to the displaced threshold and only 46 feet to lose during the remainder of the approach. So threshold crossing height of 46 feet is that for 2,600 feet, that's a pretty flat approach there. Say what you will about the smokestack being aligned with the center line and adversely impacting the approach slope. The bottom line, unfortunately, is the pilot descended below the MDA. And that was the proximate cause of this accident. The contributing factors were the smokestack and the cloud of steam that obscured her vision at a critical moment. It's unfortunate. But the approach plate she used was dated 30 Jan 2020 and showed the obstacle at that point to be 4,179 feet MSL. The same approach was revised on 6 October 22 and retained that obstacle height. The true height of the stack was found in the investigation to be 4,256 feet, meaning that if the pilot relied on the plate, she counted on 77 feet for her maneuver that she didn't have. She couldn't have known the true height of the obstacle without going out and measuring herself. The issue, as I see it, is the pressure to duck under and make the approach result in a landing on a relatively short and contaminated runway was probably pretty high. On a flight prior to this accident, she had to divert due to weather. Perhaps there was some pressure to accomplish the schedule, perhaps not. We'll never know. But she took extraordinary steps in my view. I would like to say that my answer would be to go around or to divert if required given this situation. Try it again. This brings into question the safety culture of the operation. If safety is a goal, too often what happens is lip service. It's a goal. In my opinion, safety is the cumulative result of all of our knowledge, our experience, and our decisions. It is the result of those things, not a goal. My conclusion in the previous video was do not push the limits. Respect them, go missed, do it again, or go somewhere else, because you don't know why, and you have no way of verifying what the obstacle was that forced that particular design for the approach. This is a tragedy for all concerned, and this pilot was pushed into a corner she couldn't escape from. So, how about that light? I promised you. A certain YouTuber, who will remain nameless, on a different channel did several videos on this accident, and at one point went to the scene and allegedly removed the light from the smokestack. We know this because he did a video there, and the video he did at home depicted him with the light powered on, saying this was the light from the tower. He later, when he was called on it, later said that he made that part up, and the light he showed was representative of the actual light that he left at the scene. He had touched it and pulled it out of its conduit, but he had not taken it. That's what he said. The local police referred the case of theft and criminal trespass to the Hayburn DA, who declined to prosecute for statute of limitations. So he either lied about it, stealing it, or he lied to the YouTube community that it was the actual light. What's important to you? revealing, from my perspective, it reveals a lack of integrity in the way you look at it. And this is all over a light that had no impact on the accident. It was daylight, and a blinking red light is not going to stand out enough in the homogeneous white mist of steam, snow, and clouds. You just got to ask yourself, WTF? I mean, seriously. Well, that's the way I see it. That's all I'm going to say about that subject there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire.